Yes.
Good morning. Again, I think we should just start the event. We will be fixing the presentations as we go along. Once again, thank you for joining us on this particular day for this side event. Um, the sorry. Oh, okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our side event. The side event is on women's land, coastal, and water rights, from these global commitments to local actions. My name is Sharon Rutia, and I am so honored to be your moderator for this event. We are gathered here at a very crucial time when the role of women in territorial governance and biodiversity conservation is increasingly recognized. Women's secured land and water rights are essential to achieving equitable biodiversity governance, climate resilience, and peace with nature. Today's event is hosted by the CBD's Women's Caucus, and it's only made possible through collaboration with numerous dedicated organizations, including but not limited to the ILC, ICCA Consortium, TICA, Cope Solidar, Rights and Resources Initiative, EcoMaxey, FARN, Raoul Wallenberg Institute, the Invisible Thread, WWF International, the Women's Movement of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, UN Women, FACJ, the Feminist Action for Climate Justice, Engajamundo, Green Hope Foundation, TMG. We are grateful for each one of you for your contributions. Thank you everyone for joining us here in person in Colombia. Let's begin with our keynote speech that will help us set the stage for today's discussion. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Rosalind Hefland, who's representing UN Women and the FACJ Action Coalition. Rosalind will speak on the role of women's land and water rights in biodiversity conservation. Welcome, Rosalind.
Thank you, and let me just find a place to sit really quickly. Hello, everyone. I'm Rosalind Helfand, and I'm really excited to join this incredible and very important discussion today. I work for the United Nations Entity on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, UN Women, and I work with UN Women on their entire program of work across the 3 Rio Conventions. And we see issues like land and water rights very linked across the conventions. I also advise the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition, and I'm really excited that members of the Action Coalition, which is convened by UN Women under our Generation Equality Forum, are here joining this discussion today. The rights to water and land are critical to the realization of a range of human rights. and for advancing gender equality. Yet evidence is showing that there are disproportionate impacts on these rights, resources, and the resilience of women and girls and all of their diversity that's caused by this interlinked crisis that we are suffering of climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation. Since the 1992 Earth Summit, and I do think it's really important to go back and look at the Earth Summit and look at what was agreed to at that point in time, land and resource rights and tenure security, as well as water rights, have been critical cross-cutting issues that are linking the three conventions. Importantly, these are also now integrated into the convention's gender action plans as well. Indigenous women and local communities with strong ties to the land and its resources have long advocated a radically new perspective on water and development, one that recognizes, respects, and defends the rights of water and all living beings that depend on it. Efforts to transform these values and belief systems into enforceable laws are now growing here at the Convention on Biological Diversity and beyond. The conservation and restoration of biodiversity can make essential contributions to climate change, mitigation, and also adaptation, as well as to avoiding and reducing and even reversing land degradation. Maintaining or increasing soil organic carbon contributes to climate change mitigation by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, for example, and removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, as well as to food production potential, drought resilience, climate change adaptation, and biodiversity. When women don't have land rights and tenure security, they are effectively blocked from sustainable management decisions, both for the land, but also for managing their own household needs, as we know that women are overburdened with responsibilities of care. This exacerbates poverty and inequalities and ultimately can put lives at risk. Even with land ownership, women must also have security of tenure for their contributions to decision-making to be long-lasting and effective. These linkages between land, gender, and the goals of the Rio Conventions have rendered the question of land rights absolutely essential to protecting the planet now and for future generations. This issue also impacts women environmental human rights defenders. The 2023 study, A Global Analysis of Violence Against Women Defenders in Environmental Conflicts, revealed that Indigenous women, minority women, and women from poor and rural communities are especially at risk as they challenge projects for resource extraction and projects that pollute. The report indicated that, quote, violence against women defenders is concentrated among mining, agribusinesses, and industrial conflicts in the geographical South, end quote. These are some of the very industries that, per the implementation goals of the Rio Conventions, must change. Mining operations, even for renewable energy transition materials, are often associated with ecological damage on a large scale, impacting the health and reproductive health of women and girls, and generating armed conflict and gender-based violence, and disproportionately impacting women and girls. Plans to extend deep-sea mining may likewise expand, and the effects can spread to the harms to coastal fishing activities and the women and girls who depend on these activities, such as through the build-out of onshore facilities in coastal communities to support deep-sea mining, as well as currently poorly understood potential chain reactions that impacting ocean ecosystems. Because of this, the UN General Secretary convened a panel on critical energy transition materials that has reviewed issues related to human rights and sustainability, including gender equality impacts. Lastly, the extraction of water for profit, irrespective of the ecological cost, has irrevocably damaged humanity's relationship with nature and propelled climate change, a key driver of the global water crisis and a major threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. A feminist approach to land rights and the water crisis recognizes the hugely important role women play in their communities as the main collectors, protectors, and managers of land and water, and demands their equal representation in leadership and decision-making. It calls for engaging women, with women incorporating their perspectives, including on the rights of nature for ecologically responsible water governance. As the advisor to the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition, this multi-stakeholder global partnership, I've been so excited to personally see women from around the world who are working at this intersection of climate, biodiversity, and sustainable development, who are working on women's land and water rights. Mana Omar, for example, was spring of the arid and semi-arid lands in Kenya, is working with women who have to walk further and further to get water for their communities because of the climate crisis. But this is also causing conflict with animals due to the impacts on biodiversity from climate change. So we start to see these linkages on climate, biodiversity, and land degradation, and these rights around water and land. I have colleagues from partners in Engajamundo in Brazil who are similarly looking at linkages between impacts on forest health from mining activities that are also related to the climate change transitions, but are then having impacts due to the forest health drivers of disease with women, as well as water, cleanliness issues, and how these can impact sexual and reproductive health and rights for women. It's essential that we take a whole of government and whole of society approach to tackle this global biodiversity crisis as mandated by the Global Biodiversity Framework in order to ensure women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in leadership, including women from rural areas and indigenous and local communities at all levels of environmental and biodiversity decision-making. Only in this way will we secure women's land and water rights and enable the best, most effective biodiversity, governance, and sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rosalind, for that powerful keynote speech and for highlighting the critical links between gender, biodiversity governance, and sustainable development, and the key role women and girls play in the conservation and restoration of biodiversity. We also appreciate that you have highlighted that while women and girls are the most involved in this vital process, they are still the ones whose rights are highly undermined. So our next segment of this event is a video presentation from Cope Solidar. In this video, the fisherwomen from coastal regions underscored the importance of addressing marine tenure issues and embracing a human rights-based approach in marine and coastal conservation efforts, all within the framework of the GBF. I'll invite all of us to watch the video.
Buenas tardes, soy Joana Campana, yo vengo de Chile, vengo del pueblo mapuche Huilliche, en representación de la red Mujeres Originarias por la Defensa del Mar y de la que son organizaciones de base indígena que buscan precisamente levantar más demanda de los territorios costeros que nos da la vida, que nos permite tener una cultura y que especialmente ahora en este tiempo que estamos en la COP16 de biodiversidad, ¿cierto? Queremos hacer un llamado a los estados a que lo que se está negociando hoy día para sostener la biodiversidad en los territorios contemple la participación de mujeres y de pueblos originarios.
Creemos que desde nuestra propia posición podemos resguardar todo lo que existe, el listo movimiento de nuestra comunidad para las futuras generaciones. Creemos que desde nuestra visión hacemos prevalecer la alimentación propia de nuestra cultura. No solamente apoyo por los originarios, es lo que nosotros estamos haciendo hoy. En ella hablamos veces por los distintos pueblos que hoy día lo estamos enmarcando a nivel internacional y para que los gobiernos consideren que es un trabajo mutuo, es un trabajo donde los hombres y las mujeres tienen la misma importancia y esfuerzo de poder llevar adelante nuestra cultura.
Para nosotros es importante que se considere la participación equitativa de mujeres y de hombres, pero que se ponga principalmente atención a lo que corresponde cumplir la meta donde no precisamente de mujer. Y también que este trabajo de llegar a alcanzar esa meta tenga un financiamiento, porque lastimosamente los estados no generan inversión, para desarrollar primero el concepto de conservación del territorio y cómo se implementa eso en el futuro. Estamos al debe. Y estamos al debe como sociedad, tanto de los países como del pueblo originario. Yo doy el llamado de la COP, dice que ser amigable con la naturaleza. No podemos quedarnos solamente en las normas, también hay que comprometerse las metas que cada uno de los países dice que vamos a cumplir realmente. Es importante la participación de las mujeres, de los niños, los originarios somos el 100% de los territorios y es un poco increíble que no estemos concentrados en la decisión y en la participación de aquellos. Así que desde la red de mujeres por la defensa del mar, hacemos esta invitación a los estados a que se comprometen realmente a que los gobiernos cumplan de manera ambiciosa esas metas, pero que participación de todas y todos, no alcanzamos nada y no está compromiso humano. No lo estamos viendo.
Thank you so much to Kope Solidar for that amazing video. So with that foundational understanding, we now turn to our panel discussion with a theme from global commitments to local actions, the women's rights, biodiversity, and climate. Our esteemed panelists bring a diverse expertise, and I am excited to delve into their insights on the women's role in achieving biodiversity and climate goals. So I'll just briefly introduce our panelists. On the farthest end is Ilse Pelkmans from TMG think tank. And then we have Anna Di Pangracio from FARN. And then we have Claudia Ituarte Lima from Raoul Wallenberg Institute. And my farthest right, we have Joyce Koech from Wild Heart Kenya. So each panelist will respond to specific questions on key topics, after which we will open the floor to broader reflection. So we'll start with Joyce. Joyce from Wild Heart Kenya. So how can women's traditional knowledge and rights be integrated into the land governance frameworks in order to strengthen the implementation of the Rio Conventions? Could you perhaps also share examples that you have done to successfully work on towards the community-led conservation efforts? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joyce Koech, representing World Heart Kenya, and a member of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice. So this question really tackles the work that we do in the coast of Kenya. We work with local communities and especially women who depend on the mangrove ecosystem as their source of livelihood. So when we discuss about fishermen, we also forget that we also have fisherwomen who also depend on this ecosystem. So what we have done is bring the harmony between how can women also benefit from an ecosystem that men have been benefiting from a very long time. And you notice that these women actually are also the custodians, the protectors of this ecosystem, but yet at the end of the day they get very little benefit from it. So we came up with a project where we work now with women, and because we first noticed a problem. We noticed that we were losing our biodiversity to the destruction of the mangrove ecosystem. So what we did was we worked with communities that directly benefit and live next to the mangroves. And we came up with this initiative where they used to have this project where they plant the mangroves, but they used to sell seedlings. So we were like, how then can we try to protect the mangrove ecosystem, but also try to also help these communities? So we just said, okay, why don't we work together and we will buy the seedlings from you people, and that way you can get the money, and that way we can plant. And so it was like eating two birds with one stone, I would call it, because now we were able to work with these same communities by planting mangroves, and okay, making sure that the mangroves are healthy. So within the work that we've been doing, we realized that our knowledge was insufficient, and so we started integrating the knowledge of these women. What do they know about mangroves? Because they have lived in the mangrove ecosystems for a very long time. So they have knowledge that were passed down to them by their grandmothers, by the people before. And so the discussions today is basically about the importance of traditional knowledge and their right to actually access that land, and making sure that they are also benefiting from what that ecosystem has to do with them. And so and in that way we have seen such a transformational effect from the way the ecosystem used to look before, and right now that there's a core benefit. The environment is benefiting, and also the women are also benefiting. So it is really important to recognize and protect women's rights, or resource rights, and to secure rights to land and coastal resources, and allow women to make decisions that actively contribute to the sustainable management of this ecosystem. A very good example is that I mentioned, that women play a critical role in mangrove restoration by securing the rights and benefits from mangrove resources. Women are able to contribute to climate mitigation. They're able to contribute in making sure that we have a healthy biodiversity, and we are also contributing to a society as a whole, because we notice that by empowering or by helping one woman, because we work with around 7 women at the moment, because we are still a small organization, and we work with around 7 women, and you can see the ripple effect that happens. Like when you are just empowering 7 women, but those 7 women have children, and you are able to see, they come to you and it's like, oh, my child is actually able to go to school. I'm actually able to, it could be like I'm able to buy something for myself. I'm able to buy myself a dress. I'm able to buy myself this. So you can see the power that has, and it's really important. Another thing is to incorporate the traditional knowledge. I have realized that my knowledge because when we went into mangrove restoration, I did not know much about what mangrove is. What really drove me into doing that was the need, or the problem that I noticed, that we were, destroying our mangroves, but I did not know enough knowledge about mangroves. But in studying and reading about the ecosystem and its importance in biodiversity, and it is a powerful source of a carbon sink. But you realize that incorporating traditional knowledge in conservation and planning is really key if you really want to have a successful project. These women sit down with me and they tell me stories, and we came up with a slogan in Kiswahili. It says mikoko yetu uhai wetu, which means that our mangroves are our lifeline. And so that itself, that slogan really pushed us into really making such a great impact. And so far we have planted more than 30,000 mangrove seedlings together with this group of women. And so another thing that we need to consider is to promote gender inclusive decisions making in resource management. You'll find that a lot of women, because they're always very shy, or they feel that they're not adequate, that their knowledge is not adequate. And so when you put them into such places, what they do is that they shy away. But what we need to do is that if we include them and we empower them and tell them that, hey, listen, you also deserve a place at a place like this. I am very lucky to be able to stand in front of all of you and tell you the story that we're doing, the local work that actually women are doing on the ground. And it's absolutely incredible, and we need those women in spaces such as this one. It is an honor to represent, I'm not only representing myself, I'm representing other women and thousands of other women that are, in local places and doing absolutely incredible work. And so including them in such spaces, in decision making, will really create an impact, because their knowledge is absolutely needed in such spaces. Another thing that we struggle with is, of course, access to finance and technical support for locally led organizations such as mine. So far, as I mentioned, we have planted more than 30,000 seedlings from small little grants. Now imagine what will happen if we had like technical support, if we had more resources on how we can improve our data so that we can report our impact, or if we had more resources to plant because our mission is to plant 1 billion mangroves, not only in the coast of, not only in Mombasa where I live, because we live in the coast and there is like a whole coverage of mangroves. Imagine, and I'm only in Mombasa, but we have also women from different counties that are doing also incredible stuff. So I'm going to leave it there, but I hope that I could come back. And so yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Moving on to our next panelist, Claudia. Perhaps you could just shed light on what are the legal or policy mechanisms that exist to ensure that women's land rights are respected in the context of biodiversity and climate goals as outlined in the 3 Rio Conventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'll start with a quote that really captures what I see. Sorry, should I put?
It's working, it's working.
Is it working? Okay. That encapsulates the points that I want to make now. The quote is by Wangari Maathai, Nobel Peace Prize, and a champion, both in terms of women's rights, but also biodiversity, healthy ecosystems. We're called to assist the earth to heal her wounds, and in the process, heal our own. This will happen if we see the need to revive the sense of belonging to a larger family of life. And it's really timely what she said a long time ago in connection with the topic of this COP in terms of peace with nature. And my main point is that if there is an enabling environment for environmental human rights defenders, women biosphere defenders, there is the possibility to operationalize the prevention principle and thereby prevent the massive degradation of ecosystems and the massive violation of human rights. There are bottlenecks, but I would like to highlight why this prevention principle matters in relation with women's rights. When we're talking about women environmental human rights defenders, there's a prevalence of an emergency discourse. Women are often seen as recipients of protection by the states individually. And while this is, of course, very important, just between 2012 and 2022, there were more than 1,900 killings of environmental human rights defenders. But what I want to highlight here is that this prevention is important. And an entry point to actually achieve the Rio Conventions is to use human rights. When we think about human rights, people often think about redress mechanisms once the violation has happened, and very much in relation to civil and political rights. What I want to advocate here is for women's environmental human rights defenders to have a transformative role. We need to connect those civil and political rights a transformative way which many women around the world are proposing in terms of the connection with the economy, a regenerative economy as opposed to an overconsumption economy. Relationship with nature in which we see ourselves as part of nature. And hence the connection between civil and political rights with economic, social, and cultural rights. And we have advances on this. For instance, the Escazú Agreement on access to information, public participation, and access to justice in environmental matters, it's the first treaty specifically having a recognition of the rights of environmental human rights defenders, and of course, women are included there. And while the article refers specifically to what we will frame as civil and political rights, it also says all defenders' rights, which allows us an entry point to have a more progressive interpretation in line with the human rights principle of indivisibility and interconnectedness of human rights. And we have also institutional means, for instance, the recently adopted Defenders Action Plan, which brings those ideas into more concrete action and will depend now in all countries that are parties of the Escazú, but I would just say also beyond, get other regions inspired by this ground-up effort that was catalyzed. My second point is intersectionality. Well, we often hear about intersectionality in terms of these overlapping layers of oppression and inequality. I'm, of course, very concerned with that. But I would like to invite you to think of it, again, as women defenders, as agents of change. And this recognizing, I mean, we heard from the last presentation how this knowledge about mangroves was critical. This is, of course, not to underestimate that indigenous people, for instance, in 2021 were 40% of the environmental defenders killed. And we have also youth, for instance, youth in the Pacific, triggering what will become the advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice. And while this will focus in climate, we are really looking at this interconnectedness of the biosphere. And we have also an upcoming Inter-American Court of Human Rights advisory opinion that will directly address the issue of defenders. And while these are not binding, these advisory opinions, as some have said, they have a preventive diplomacy and peace power. So to conclude, I encourage us to see the issue of women's environmental defenders beyond the emergency discourse for a more preventive approach. This needs to be systemic if we want to give prevention a fair chance and address the root causes. So I'll make 4 concrete recommendations. We need laws, national laws, not only international laws, that recognize explicitly women environmental defenders. And also beyond environmental law, we need to reform civil, administrative, criminal law, including when there's abuse of the law, in which the law is used to criminalize and silence women defenders. Second, we need accountability. If nothing happens after a violation has happened, it will just continue reproducing. So when there's a project where attacks have been done, immediately suspend that project. So there are consequences for those violating. Third, we need to embed this into institutional and legal frameworks that are adequately funded. And here, as we heard from the previous presentation, funding that goes directly for women environmental human rights defenders in coastal areas, in land, in water. And my final point, intergenerational aspects. Many of the work that women environmental human rights defenders do cannot necessarily be seen today. It's seen across generations. And that's why, if we want to harness and catalyze this work that women environmental defenders do, not only benefiting themselves, but also other present and future generations of living beings, not only humans, but also others, I invite you to think about how to make prevention a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for that insightful presentation. I'll go next to Anna. Anna, perhaps you could just highlight, given the target to conserve 30% of biodiversity-rich areas by 2030, how important is it to implement a gender-responsive policy in these specific areas? And perhaps maybe highlight what are the practical aspects that can be taken to ensure women's participation in achieving these conservation targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for the kind invitation. Nice to see you all. I will speak in Spanish, honoring we are in Colombia. Closer? Okay.
It seems the...
This one is better. Now, well, I was saying I will speak in Spanish. Bueno, hay mucha evidencia que respetar y proteger los derechos humanos ayuda a crear transparencia y responsabilidad y fomenta beneficios de conservación en el sentido amplio a largo plazo. Y esto incluye a las áreas protegidas, que es una de las herramientas más utilizadas para conservar la biodiversidad, como también desarrollos más recientes como lo que se conoce como OMEC o OECM por la sigla en inglés, otras medidas eficaces de conservación basadas en áreas. Las políticas y programas de conservación que son transformadoras en género son aquellas que tratan de lograr el éxito de la conservación de la biodiversidad, teniendo en cuenta explícitamente las opiniones, necesidades e intereses tanto de hombres como mujeres. Y la incorporación de una perspectiva de género en áreas protegidas y conservadas debe darse en todas las etapas, desde lo que va a refiere a la planificación, al diseño, como a la implementación, reporte y monitoreo. Y este es un aspecto importante porque era un elemento que era bastante débil en las metas de Aichi, en lo que era la meta 11, en lo que se refiere a los derechos de las comunidades, ¿no? Pueblos indígenas, comunidades locales, no solo de la participación, sino también el reconocimiento de sus territorios y derechos de acceso a la tierra, tenencia segura y a los bienes naturales, ¿no? Entonces, más pensando en términos prácticos, cuando hablamos de áreas protegidas y conservadas y de su diseño y planificación, para poder asegurar que sean transformadoras en cuanto a género, primero los estados tienen que empezar por hacer una identificación de actores y sujetos de derecho interesados, con una especial atención en aquellos que potencialmente pueden verse afectados de manera positiva o negativa por iniciativas de áreas protegidas y conservadas, aquellos cuyos derechos se pueden ver afectados, y especialmente foco en aquellos grupos que suelen verse más marginados en lo que es la toma de decisiones, que incluye a mujeres y niñas, entre otras. También es necesario tener información sobre aspectos sociales, culturales, económicos, políticos, sobre los cuales se construye una iniciativa de área protegida o conservada. La evaluación tiene que identificar necesidades, intereses, conocimientos, comportamientos por género que van a dar forma a este tipo de iniciativas, ¿no?, de conservación. Y la información que se recolecte no solo tiene que ser estrictamente en esa zona física donde va a existir la futura área protegida o conservada, sino también en zonas aledañas, e incluso también se puede pensar a nivel de ecorregión. Si no ha habido todavía algo que en países de Latinoamérica estamos bastante retrasados, procesos de ordenamiento ambiental del territorio, por lo menos ante avanzar en una propuesta de área protegida o conservada, es necesario, aunque sea a nivel de ese espacio o esa región, poder tener ese tipo de información sobre el contexto espacial, ¿no? Lugares, zonas, territorios, ecosistemas, y cómo eso se vincula con aspectos sociales, culturales, económicos que puedan ayudar a la mejor zonificación posible del área en cuestión. También es necesario hacer un análisis de la división social del trabajo desde la perspectiva de género para reconocer y valorizar todo el trabajo realizado en una comunidad de tipo productivo, reproductivo, comunitario, para planificar el impacto que iniciativas de áreas protegidas y conservadas tienen en el territorio y para las comunidades que allí habitan o en los alrededores. También hacer un análisis tanto del uso, acceso y control de los bienes naturales, de la tierra y la repartición justa y equitativa de los beneficios. El acceso a la biodiversidad, el control sobre ella, los beneficios que de ella se desprenden, la responsabilidad de conservarla y los impactos de su destrucción, sabemos que no son distribuidos equitativamente. Entonces, ninguna iniciativa de conservación, y eso incluye a las áreas protegidas y conservadas, puede obviar lo que son las diferencias de género si es que realmente quiere tener un impacto positivo, real en las condiciones de vida a nivel local. Muchas iniciativas de áreas protegidas han dejado de lado el reconocer, rescatar y valorar las costumbres y tradiciones culturales asociadas a los bienes naturales, lo que ha llevado a conflictos, ¿no?, entre los grupos humanos que habitan esas zonas y los administradores externos, ¿no?, los que se encargan de la gestión del sistema de áreas protegidas y conservadas. Por eso siempre es importante tener en cuenta las concepciones culturales o tradicionales, lo que ayuda a clarificar el trasfondo de muchas actitudes de mujeres y hombres hacia los bienes naturales. Y también hacer una revisión de las políticas y leyes para garantizar una implementación equitativa, como lo pide la Meta 3 de áreas protegidas y conservadas, y realizar los cambios que sean necesarios a nivel nacional y subnacional para que eso efectivamente sea así. Y una vez declarada el área protegida o conservada, también todo esto requiere que el proceso de desarrollar planes de manejo de la administración y manejo de áreas protegidas y conservadas, incluyendo su personal, ¿no?, guardaparques, administrativos, entre otros, y su monitoreo y evaluación también prevean un enfoque de género. Tiene que haber un sistema de salvaguardas de derechos humanos y mecanismos de rendición de cuentas para garantizar que los esfuerzos de la Meta 3 se consoliden y no exacerben inequidades que ya existen y preocupaciones en torno al derecho de las personas, ¿no? Tienen que ir acompañados también, para que no sean solo, como decimos, áreas de papel, de una fuerte estrategia financiera y presupuestos, pero que también allí se les incorpore una mirada de género, ¿no?, que sean responsivos al género, facilitando fondos a pueblos indígenas, comunidades locales, mujeres, jóvenes, que muchas veces son postergados también en el acceso a fondos, ya sea en su relación con el área protegida o si es conservada en lo que directamente se trata de sus territorios. Y siempre también alentar a que los organismos que se encargan de la gestión de áreas protegidas y conservadas tengan staff dedicado, especializado en asuntos de género para poder transversalizarlo a su interior. Y para ir cerrando en todas estas cuestiones, en todas estas instancias, se tiene que dar la participación social, incluyendo el acceso a la información. La Meta 3 habla de que las áreas protegidas y conservadas tienen que ser gobernadas de forma equitativa, y esto implica la participación plena, equitativa y efectiva de comunidades, y eso incluye a mujeres y niñas. Realmente este es un elemento primordial para hacer más efectivo y eficaz los sistemas de áreas protegidas y conservadas, que tienen que incorporar enfoque de género. Entonces se tiene que facilitar la participación de mujeres, realizar actividades en horarios y lugares que permitan una mayor participación de ellas, considerando la duración de las sesiones, la cercanía al hogar, el formato y el contenido de los materiales, ¿no? De capacitación, comunicación, empoderar a mujeres y a los grupos de ellas para que se hagan parte del proceso, generar todas las capacidades necesarias, no solo de ellas respecto de áreas protegidas y conservadas, sino también de nuevo a todo el resto de la gente involucrada en el proceso, incluyendo autoridades, y promover constantemente espacios de intercambio de experiencias para compartir lecciones, éxitos y fracasos en la materia y evitar repetirlos, ¿no? Entonces, también hay que tener en cuenta, y con esto cierro, que el 30x30 no solo se alcanza con áreas protegidas y conservadas, también, y las metas, todo el marco mundial, ¿no? De biodiversidad, también hay que cuidar el 70% restante. Y eso requiere de poder hacer realidad las restantes metas, a lo cual también hay que incorporarle estos elementos de participación social con perspectiva de género. Esta meta está muy relacionada con la meta 1 de planificación territorial y con la meta 2 de restauración. Y lo mismo aplica al proceso de Estrategia Nacional de Biodiversidad, principal instrumento para bajar a nivel nacional los compromisos que asumimos internacionalmente. Eso incluye la meta 3, y donde allí debiera insertarse estas estrategias de áreas protegidas y conservadas, y donde también se tienen que dar procesos de participación social y con enfoque de género desde el diseño, la implementación, el monitoreo y el reporte. No asegura nada, puede ser el proceso que sea exitoso, pero finalmente en los documentos que los países elevan al convenio falle y no esté la cuestión de género o de mujeres, como me ha pasado en mi país, que por lo menos la estrategia en su texto avanzado que vimos no menciona mujeres ni género, pese a que aumentó mucho la presencia de grupos de mujeres en el proceso y de organizaciones que trabajamos con ellas, así que también esto es algo de largo plazo, ¿no? Si no se dio hasta ahora, no hay que frustrarse y hay que seguir trabajando para que las cuestiones de conservación se den en línea con lo que dice el Marco Mundial de Biodiversidad, que por suerte, gracias a sociedad civil, tiene a los derechos humanos, incluyendo los derechos de las mujeres en su corazón, ¿no? En su médula. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that amazing presentation, highlighting the key targets that are needed to achieve this. Next to Anna is our last but not least panelist, Ilse. Perhaps, Ilse, could you highlight to us how the lack of secure land and water tenure rights for women impact biodiversity governance and conservation goals, highlighting the work that TMG does and some of the projects that you have championed for to achieve and address these issues. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, thank you very much. Maybe we move straight to the next slide, please. Yeah, so the question is how are tenure insecurity of women and biodiversity measures related, right? So, so first of all, what is the impact of tenure insecurity on the results of biodiversity projects? And many of the speakers have already touched upon this topic before me. But things that we have to think of, for example, is women without tenure security have no access to loans, for example, if they don't have a formal tenure rights, so it's difficult to get money for long-term investments. They also don't have the security and the commitment to really invest in planting trees, which will take years, right, before they benefit from it. But probably most importantly is that women with informal rights are often not part of the biodiversity programs. We are working in Kenya and in some contexts, in some carbon credit projects, for example, having formal tenure rights is a requirement to actually be part of the program. So by this, women are, in most cases, excluded. And I think that's just a missed opportunity, right? We can't have effective biodiversity programs when half of the world population is missed out. So we're missing out on the real stewards of land. We miss out on the expertise that women have, and that will lead to ineffective climate action or biodiversity programs in this case. So that's like the first arrow on the top. So tenure and security undermines the effectiveness of biodiversity programs. But the other way around also counts. So biodiversity programs can also have a negative impact on tenure rights of women. And I think, Claudia, you already alluded to it quite a bit, talking also about the prevention of human rights violations. We have to remember that all the 3 Rio Conventions, to achieve their targets, require land. There's no way we can achieve these objectives without land, right? So there's a huge rush for land, a lot of competition for access to land. Some countries even have in their commitments, they actually need more land that they actually have in their country. So there's really a rush for land, a lot of competition for land, and also in this context, land conflicts are likely to grow, right? To increase. We see already issues of eviction, for example, in the so-called people-free conservation measures that have taken place in the past. We have the historic case of the Ojek communities in Kenya, for example. But maybe also something that is not so much highlighted normally is that there's also like this kind of smaller conflicts within the household. So of course these huge community things are coming into the media and very well known. But biodiversity programs can also lead to conflicts within the family between the man and the wife, right? An example of this is as soon as land becomes monetized, for example, through biodiversity credit programs or carbon credit projects, as soon as it's monetized, suddenly the control moves away from the woman to the man, which causes tensions, which is a risk for women of losing access and control over land. The same for land use decisions. Like as long as it's about crops and production of food for their own family, it's a woman's business. But as soon as now compensation for trees or tree planting, again in Western Kenya, tree planting is a man's business. So there you also see it's like kind of impacts that we might not think of straight away, right? But it is impacts of these kind of activities that impact the access to land for women, and with that also the access to livelihood. So it is key to protect women's tenure rights. Maybe we move to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I have it in my own hands. Yeah, so the question is, how can we protect women's rights better? And I was asked, well, we're trying to move the global to the local, right? So let me just propose or present 2 examples of what TMG is doing to contribute to that. So one of the first solutions, contribution to a solution, is the Haki RD tool. It's a digital rights reporting tool that allows women to report in a safe way about rights violations, land rights violations, particularly in this case. So they can send an SMS, which is like cost-free. They don't have to travel anywhere. They don't become visible that they are actually looking out for support in context of land conflicts. And with that, they get an effective response by the community-based organization that is receiving that SMS, which helps them to gain access to justice. I think, Claudia, you already talked about it. I recognize the importance of prevention, obviously, but I think we cannot secure the rights of women if they don't have a mechanism for redress in case of violations. So it's very important, but access to justice for women is a major challenge in many contexts. So through this, this tool, they have a better access to justice. And maybe a last thing that is interesting of this tool, I would say, is that it allows us to systematically document rights violations of women. And it really shows what the nature and the scope of the problems is that women are facing when it comes to tenure rights. So be it in the context of climate action or biodiversity context or otherwise. So we have a wealth of data, we have a wealth of facts that is actually amplifying the voice of women to speak up, to advocate for their rights, and it's providing the facts to reach out with to our governments and hold them accountable for respecting the rights and do run the extra mile to protect women's tenure rights. Maybe a second tool that I wanted to present shortly. It's basically, it's not only a tool, I'm just showing the tool, but it's a bit bigger program behind it. It's our Human Rights for Land work. We are talking all the time about the human rights, right? And the CBD being anchored in a human rights-based approach, which is a very good start. If you look at the 3 conventions, this is the only one that puts it really at the heart of everything. But what does it mean exactly? Like Claudia was mentioning a range of human rights, like access to information, access to participation, other political civil rights, but also economic, social, and cultural rights. And I don't know about you, but you might not be lawyers or have a legal background, and that is the case for many of the land rights defenders, right? So, you know, you get this information and tomorrow you wake up and you start wondering, like, what were the rights again that she was talking about? Where can I find them? Etc. So we decided to make life a bit easier for land rights defenders and develop a tool that is actually supporting people to really understand how land and land governance, responsible land governance, is linked to human rights obligations of state. We should not forget that. It's human rights obligations as soon as it's ratified by states. So the tool that I just put a screenshot there is called the Human Rights for Land Navigator, where you can, on the left side, you see all the paragraphs of the VGTT, the Voluntary Guidelines on Responsible Governance of Tenure. That was endorsed 2012 by the World Committee on Food Security. And we just looked at it, like, okay, in the aspects, internationally recognized standards for land governance, responsible land governance, what are the human rights implications? So you can just filter for these kind of things. But we can also filter for countries so that you only get the information for the country that you're interested in. Well, the example that I just put there is, I don't know, I just selected the right to health, the right to clean and healthy environment. Of course, one that is very much talked about here. And I selected the land governance topics in terms of recognitions of tenure right. And you see different instruments, right? Of course, you see the Escazú agreement, you see the Protocol of Salvador, you see the you see UNDROP, the Declaration on Peasant Rights, UNDRIP of indigenous peoples. You can just open the articles to see what exactly this is about. And I put this one because it's a bit, maybe it's interesting to see that, for example, in Africa, there's no regional agreement yet that is, you know, the equivalent to the Escazú or the Aarhus Convention or agreement. But there are other ways to reach out to your government and hold them accountable for respecting these rights. So you've seen the Maputo Protocol on women rights. Actually, this article gives very clear guidance on public or the right to participate in public decision making, the respect of tenure rights of women, etc. So this is just a reference tool that you can use to reach out to governments, to hold them accountable, and also for litigation. I think the advantage of the human rights-based approach is that we refer to international human rights standards that are legally binding. So we should use that and work with that. Maybe a last point, if I still have a second. Yeah, almost, almost there. Another, and maybe a kind of an innovative aspect in this work, apart from this tool, we also have a human rights-based monitoring tool. But I think what is interesting to highlight here is that we're working closely with national human rights institutions. And I'm working for an organization that is mostly working on land rights, and I see many similar organizations, so much into land rights and land governance and women rights. But it's hard to make this connection, and kind of the human rights actors seem to work sometimes in silos, and the land rights actors in another silo, right? So the tool that I just showed already helps to bridge the two, but we are really working together. It's the mandate of national human rights organizations to monitor human rights violation, including in the context of biodiversity programs. So let's use on that. Let's use also the system, the international human rights system of the monitoring of treaty bodies, for example. Let's use that, let's grab them. There's the special rapporteur for climate, the special rapporteur for clean and healthy environment. They were in this room this morning. They were just telling me about plenty of missions that are coming up, monitoring missions. Yet let's use these opportunities as land activists to get our topic on their agenda and seize the opportunities from that system, in addition to all the other work that we're doing. Yeah, thank you very much. Let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Ilse, for that insightful presentation on how it is achievable to at least move a step forward in the realization of these rights, especially access to information, etc. So one of our panelists will not make it here, unfortunately, but she sent some snippet of what she would have really wanted to echo with regards to this topic. Christina Egenta, she's the coordinator of the Global Governance Policy, WWF International. And so she wanted to highlight how women's traditional knowledge and rights can be integrated into land governance frameworks to strengthen the implementation of the 3 Rio Conventions. I'll read verbatim. So when we speak of women and land and water governance, especially in rural areas and indigenous lands, there is still a high level of cultural and social invisibility on this matter. Governance of land is not so commonly associated with women in formal and policy context. There are policy barriers, but also systematic social barriers, as well as cultural biases, stereotypes, that blind us from seeing women, especially those living in rural areas and indigenous lands, in roles of leadership and expertise linked to land use and governance and spatial planning. For example, women tend to be associated with the domestic sphere as opposed to forests, linked to tidal areas as opposed to high seas. This is a common ideology-biased perception of women's spaces to something only close to homes and associated with family needs, an assumption of more constrained physically frequentation of spaces by women. All these barriers keep a cloud of invisibility over women's real knowledge, use of the land and other natural resources, and women's management choices that are guided by deep considerations of sustainability, care for the land, and the future generations. This cloud of invisibility translates often in policy negligence and gender-blind decisions related to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. Extensive exercises in community mapping in Kalimantan, which is Indonesia, that compared maps produced by groups of men, groups of women, and the youth in the community revealed different uses and knowledge of the territory and its resources, fundamentally complementary and mutually strengthening. This means that a management plan of a territory, a plan de vida, and even a spatial plan needs the views of both women and men to be effective, inclusive, and ultimately sustainable. Similarly, a spatial plan that is biodiversity inclusive and area-based conservation, the GBF Target 1 and 3, need not only to be based on a participatory process, but also be gender responsive and bring women's perception, their values, and specialized knowledge of the land and water into the policy arena of biodiversity policy and making leadership. So for effective and sustainable governance of the land, which is deeply rooted in the women's rights and knowledge and values, women's participations and their values need to be recognized and taken into account. Thank you. Perhaps we could just have 1 or 2 questions from the audience to the panelists very briefly, and then we do a last video and then wrap up the presentation. Thank you. Just 1 or 2 on this side, 1 on this side, and 1 on this side.
Thank you to all the panelists. This was really insightful. My name is Manuelita. I work for a consultancy firm called Climate Focus. I'm wondering, I think like land tenure inequality is really related to policy and to cultural and social context. And I'm wondering what are like those like mitigating factors that especially projects can take in order to address um, land tenure inequality. Thank you.
I believe that was a compliment, a question to who? Pacific?
Sorry, did I capture your question where you're wondering what can people do to address tenure inequality? Yeah. In the context of nature-related project. Yeah, I think, I mean, action needs to happen at different levels, right? But in context of nature-related projects, I think these projects have to take mitigation measures to avoid their measures have a negative impact on women and are actually increasing inequality in tenure rights. I think, no, I don't think, I'm sure they have to involve women actively to really understand what their needs and opportunities are, right? So this is like this gender analysis is needed. You have to do this assessment. That also means like any kind of risk assessment at forehand needs to deliberately reach out to women to find out what their particular challenges are. Because I think if you only know their reality and the challenges they face in daily life, only then you can cater for that, right? And deliberately cater for that. Make it possible that they participate in your project, that you create an enabling environment for them to join. Or to address tenure inequalities like stress also within the household, right? Involve men in this discussion. There's a lot of gender inequality at the roots or at the heart of these challenges, right? So I think that's a responsibility that anyone who is like managing climate projects or biodiversity projects has. And then of course, on the other hand, there's a responsibility of the legal protection, address inequalities and access to right for women. Which is at the same, another aspect to address. And then last but not least, I think it always comes from these three sides. Women themselves have to have the knowledge and the awareness of what their rights are. And I think community-based organizations can really support them to raise their voice and speak up. And it's really through positive examples. Widows in Kenya have suffered a lot of conflicts that now speak out and actually make sure that other women also report about issues and challenge tenure inequality. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I also would like to add in terms of your particular question in projects. I mean, what concrete projects can do. So here I would like to point out to various tools, including, for instance, vulnerability and capability assessments and action research, because they provide also an opportunity to build bridges between communities, NGOs, your consultancy, for instance, that you mentioned, and academia. Academia is a key ally that can have a more long-term relationships that sometimes NGOs that have limited funding or governmental officials that depend on their mandate period. So there was, for instance, in South Africa, there was a university that supported this vulnerability and capability assessment, had girls at its core, and you saw girls in their villages suddenly being the ones advocating with their families of what should be done in terms of like mangroves planting to prevent the impacts of climate change, or menstrual hygiene, that was also a specific issue that was addressed. So really try to contextualize what's going on to really address the systemic causes.
Thank you so much. Just one last question from, okay, just this side. One last.
Thank you. I'll direct my question specifically to the presenter from Kenya. I listened to your presentation, and most times forums such as these where you have the gender imbalances, especially on projects, I sometimes leave the forum always asking the same question. In this particular case, have you tried, or how have you tried incorporating the men in the community? And if you have, what have been some of the difficulties that you have faced? Because listening to your presentation, and in addition to that, the other presenters, I take into consideration some of the cultural aspects. And if it is cultural, how do we, if we want to move forward and have that kind of gender balance for a community that we are looking for, in terms of not just for now, but for the children, the younger ones coming forward, how can we break that problem, so to speak? I'm from the Caribbean, and my friend here, I asked her the same question. I asked, are we facing that same problem in the Caribbean? So from your perspective, I would really like to know if you have tried to incorporate the men in some of the decision making, in some of the problem solving, and what have been some of the difficulties or the challenges that you have faced?
Thank you so much for the question. When we first started our project, our aim was to empower women, but also in working with women, we also work with men. It's not like we do not work with men. We also work with mostly with men, but also with men, because when it comes to, we also realize that when she mentions about land rights, you'll find that if we work with men have most power when it comes to land, and so what we're trying to do is that try to also bring men into the conversation, but you'll find they come and they kind of like take over, you know, either take some, for example, there was this a man called Athmani, and asked me, why am I trying to empower this women? You know, like, this women should be at home, should be doing this. But, and he was like, why are you, because I work also with Muslim women who we are trying to also empower. And so he was saying, like, why are you, you know, exposing her to public and everything? So I work directly with women, but I also understand that bringing men and making sure that, what can I say? Making sure that, because some of the solutions we can achieve without also the men being part of the organization. But I mostly work with women, so.
Thank you. I think just to add, we can't have the gender discussion without involving the men, because for sure men are also big part of the women's lives, because if you limit culturally, men have had more strength, more access, are even living with these women and girls. And so bringing them into this discussion, bringing them into these spaces is very vital to ensure that we are able to work together and leave no one behind, right? So we'll have another video. Sorry, the first one that was shown was from Tika. This one is now from Cope Solidar. And Maybe as they fix this, we could just go to our last panelist and presentation for today. As we close the session, we are greatly honored to invite Helen Paulsen. She is a senior development advisor at DEFRA and lives and works in the UK. And she will provide a summary of the key takeaways and action steps for today's discussion. Helen, you are so much welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is that in the right place? I always get it wrong. Thank you so much, Sharon and all the panelists, for those really intriguing and wide-ranging interventions. You've given me a really, really difficult job to try to kind of, join the common threads between them. And also, I'm also conscious that we are over time. And there's coffee and food at the back, so I will try to keep this incredibly brief. I don't know, I do have a slide with our principles for inclusive, gender-responsive and locally led biodiversity action, which for me are a way to link some of the things that we've been talking about. If it's possible to get that up, that's great. If not, perhaps we can do that afterwards. But I'm just going to be really quick in terms of the summing up. I have a slide that I quite often present to colleagues. So I work in, DEFRA, for those of you who don't know, it's the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK. So we are not the main kind of development department of the UK, that's the FCDO. We are primarily a domestic department concentrating on those issues with a relatively limited ODA budget where we work internationally on these things. So I quite often work with scientists, analysts, ecologists, people who are very focused on the biodiversity part of the equation, much less focused, with some honourable exceptions, on the human development part of the equation. So it's really nice to be in this discussion where we're focused on human development. Okay, brilliant. If you could just forward on, there is a slide, I think it's slide 5. Do you have control, Sharon? Because this is all background. This one, yeah, the 7-point framework, if you can get that one to come up. And I say that in the context of, the biodiversity poverty paradox, in the context, I'm dropping things, thank you, of ODA eligible countries, the impacts of biodiversity loss and climate change affect the poorest and most marginalised in society most. So that's the point that Rosalind, you made so powerfully initially, and all of our panellists in various different ways. However, and I think this is the critical thing where you've all intervened, it's the action to tackle biodiversity loss and climate change in poorer countries and within poorer communities that does not necessarily help the poorest and most marginalised most. And that is the thing that you are all talking about. You are saying in our rush and our panic and our anxiety to address this appalling biodiversity crisis, we are sometimes, sorry, am I in the way? Do you need me to move? Oh, yes. Can you keep clicking, Sharon? Because there's 7. We've only got 1 at the moment. I'm going to stand up so I'm not in the way. So in our rush to do that, sometimes we are jumping over the human development, the gender equality, the poverty sort of issues that we need to address. So the way that I like to put it, and this is really facetious, so don't quote me, is we still talk a lot, and you can see it at this COP, we still talk a lot about saving the whale or saving the mangroves, and we don't talk enough about supporting and helping and scaffolding the people who live off and amongst and with the mangroves and those ecosystems, or the whale thing doesn't really work here. So that is what you're all talking about, and the really complex requirements that has, the time it takes, the resources it takes to do it properly, the multiplicity of tools, including legal tools that you were talking about, Claudia, and Ilse, these great tools around kind of protecting and recognizing land rights, and Anna, all these kind of processes that you're talking about, resources and participatory processes and recognizing the context. So I think you're all talking about how do we kind of put that back in, and how do we guard against an approach that sort of tries to jump over the messy, complex human gendered bits in between. So these principles that we developed in September with a kind of multi-stakeholder group at Wilton Park in the UK are an attempt, they are a draft, to try to summarize the way that we can think about and act on biodiversity, bringing those issues into account. They're not perfect, they need new work. We'd really welcome your engagement, and all the wisdom and knowledge that the panelists have about your specific, very specialist areas of expertise. If you could just go on to the next slide, Sharon, and the next one. If you click on this QR code, you can access the principles in full. That's me. Do get in touch. Very much welcome your thoughts, advice, and engagement on this, and from all the panelists as well. But I think, just to kind of really, it is about everything that you're doing is so critical and so important to make sure that we don't lose sight of the gendered human aspect that we need to work with and through. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Helen, for that insight. I think we'll all reach out so that we can work collaboratively towards the realization of this great work that women and girls are doing at the local level, from the global and international conversations to the local actions. I think perhaps just last one video from Copa Solidar. I think maybe I can just do my closing as we wrap up, and then we'll watch this video. We need to watch this video. So as we wrap up, I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the speakers, the panelists, and the audience. Each and every one of you have been vital in this event for your participation and contribution. And so as we carry forward, let's carry today's discussions, insights to foster a greater support for the women and the girls in the roles they play in the biodiversity governance, and as they ensure that their rights and their knowledge are considered and are taken into account for the conservation efforts that they put. Thank you so much. So now for the last video.
El rol de la mujer es pescadora. Nosotras pescamos, hacemos toda la labor, pescador, hacemos toda la labor, pescador. Sin embargo, por muchos años no nos permitían siempre estábamos como detrás de los que muchas veces nuestro trabajo no se ve tan importante como el trabajo que realizan los hombres en temas de pesca, como el trabajo que realizan los hombres en temas de pesca, y por qué no de otros temas. La participación de la mujer de toma de decisiones debe ser igual que la de los hombres. Debe ser igual que las mujeres jugamos un papel muy interesante, y mujeres jugamos un papel muy interesante que ver con el buen vivir de nuestro territorio, que ver la defensa de la biodiversidad, la defensa de la biodiversidad, pero también somos las que administramos la economía, somos las que administramos la economía mucho. Aunque se ha ido rompiendo la brecha, rompiendo la brecha, para que esos derechos, para que esos derechos, de las personas y de las mujeres que vivimos se vean, los desafíos que nosotras las mujeres pescadoras estamos llevando a cabo ha sido la defensa por nuestros ríos, las ciénagas, quebradas, el mar,
también la biodiversidad acuática, esas especies que cada día se están extinguiendo y que nos perjudican la seguridad alimentaria y la economía de nosotras las pescadoras.
Por eso es que no queremos que nos vulneren. Por eso es que no queremos que nos dejen de lado cuando tomen decisiones. Porque de esa manera como pueblo, podemos seguir vigentes. Si no, nos van a exterminar, pero nos van a exterminar con sus malas decisiones.
Es muy importante que se había utilizado el tema de mujeres, ya que hay biodiversidad biológica, la meta 23 habla mucho que no se podrían tomar decisiones si las mujeres no estamos presentes en los temas de tenencia, en los temas del mar, ¿verdad? Ya que nosotras somos las principales afectadas ya tomas
como mujer afrocaribeña que soy, que se nos tome en cuenta y que se nos defienda nuestro territorio, que se está perdiendo por una u otra razón, que se nos defienda nuestro derecho como pescadores, y sobre todo ese espacio que necesitamos dentro de la sociedad donde podemos seamos capaces de adquirir el derecho a la tierra, el derecho a los permisos de pesca, a tener propiedades dentro del sector pesquero. La pesca en unidad de resistencia.
Thank you so much once again for joining. Kindly ensure that you return the interpretation devices. They are the property of ICCA. Thank you so much to our partners for making this event a success. Thank you.